You were a Marxist at one time in your life. What was your wake-up to what was wrong with that line of thinking?
Facts.
For me, Thomas Sowell is that rarest of species, an honest intellectual. I'm Jason Riley. I'm a journalist and author. For more than 2 decades, I have closely studied the life and work of Thomas Sowell. Tom Sowell is known for his views on economics, history, race, and politics. But I've also discovered some lesser-known aspects of his life. You're about to meet one of the greatest minds of the past half-century. What distinguishes Thomas Sowell's scholarship? First, intellectual honesty, asking the right questions, gathering the relevant data, and following the facts to their logical conclusion, even if that conclusion turns out to be unpopular. Second, the importance of incentives and the reality of trade-offs in addressing our social problems. Third, the belief that a group's upward mobility derives primarily from its development of human capital. And finally, Sowell has an abiding respect for social processes and existing institutions and the role they play in decision-making. So where did Tom Sowell's ideas come from? What formed the foundation of a man who would go on to become one of the country's foremost public intellectuals? That story began 600 miles to the south of Midtown Manhattan, more than 8 decades ago. Thomas Sowell was born in Gastonia, North Carolina, on June 30th, 1930. The Great Depression was just getting underway. And like many blacks in the South at the time, his family had no electricity, no central heating, and no hot running water. Sowell's father died before Tom was born, and his mother, a maid, died in childbirth just a few years later.
He was adopted by his great aunt and raised by her and her 2 daughters.
My whole career would not have been possible without the particular family in which I was raised, which was not composed of educated people. I mean, nobody in that family had ever graduated from high school, and most did not graduate from grade school. But they were interested in education, and they were interested in me.
When Thomas Sowell was 8 years old, his family moved from North Carolina to New York City and settled here at 720 St. Nicholas Avenue in the neighborhood of Harlem. Young Tommy, as he was called, ventured out into a big city for the very first time. He rode double-decker buses and learned to cross busy streets, all by himself.
We were much poorer than the people in Harlem or most anywhere else today. It was my last year or 2 at home that we finally had a telephone. We had a radio. We never had a television. But in another sense, in the sense of the things you need to get ahead, I was enormously more fortunate than most black kids today.
While coming of age in Harlem, Sowell discovered the magic of education, thanks to a family friend named Eddie Mapp. Eddie brought Tom here to the Harlem Public Library, taught him how to find books that interested him, taught him how to check them out.
He came from a highly educated family, and they immediately saw the implications if they could get him to mentor me. And I saw all these books, and I had no idea why we were there when I don't have any money to buy one book. And so what am I going to do with all these, hundreds of books up on the shelf? And he very patiently walked me through the whole thing. And again, I was very reluctant to take out a library card because I didn't know what all this is about. But he talked me into it, and I borrowed a couple of books. And really, had I not encountered him, the entire rest of the story could not have been the way it was. When you start getting in the habit of reading when you're 8 years old, that's a different ballgame than if you have to wait till you're a teenager and it's too late now.
Thanks to that same friend Eddie, a young Tom Sowell was pointed in the right direction regarding his schooling. The grade school he attended in Harlem was a good one. But when it came time for junior high school, the one in Tom's neighborhood was not so great.
When I finished elementary school, and they assigned me to a junior high school in a very bad neighborhood, he told me that you can get transferred. And I got transferred to a much better school, Had I gone to that other school, again, the story would have been entirely different.
He would become a firm believer in allowing parents to choose the best school possible for their children, whether it be private schools, religious schools, or even the option that sparks intense debate among lawmakers and educators today, charter schools. Drafted in 1951, Tom joined the Marines, where he taught pistol shooting and took photographs. The lessons Sowell learned in the Marines would stay with him for the rest of his life, especially his love of photography, which would become Tom's artistic outlet while he pursued a life filled with studying facts and data.
Photography did have connections to his vision of reality. Tom once commented to me that to be a photographer, you have to master trade-offs. All of the little adjustments that you fiddle with in the camera never involve making everything better or everything worse. It's a matter of trading one thing off to another. And a theme in Tom's work on society is that all policies involve trade-offs. And Tom often loses patience at people with sweeping visions. Here's how we can improve society. Here's a solution to a problem. And Tom points out in his political writings, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. Just like photography.
The University of Chicago is hallowed ground for Thomas Sowell. Here's where some of the most influential economic philosophies of modern times were formed. It's called the Chicago School of Economics. And it's where Tom would be mentored by intellectual giants like George Stigler and Milton Friedman.
You know, in Chicago, if it was true because you could prove it was true. It was true because you had the evidence, you had the logic, and so forth. They explored the specific ways in which the market does and doesn't work. The idea, you know, that people are rational on the whole, and that if you allow those people to operate in the marketplace, you'll generally get better results. My first professional job, I was a summer intern at the U.S. Department of Labor. One of my biggest concerns was about minimum wages. At first, I thought, well, this is good because all these people are poor and they'll get a little higher income, and so that'll be helpful. And then as I studied economics, I began to see, well, there's a downside. They may lose their jobs completely, so that is that. When I was at the Labor Department, I tried to talk about that to them, and eventually I came up with some test of it. And when I came up with how we might test this, I was waiting to hear congratulations, you see, that I had this. And I could see these people were stunned. They said, oh, this idiot has stumbled on something that will ruin us all. And I realized the U.S. Department of Labor had its own agenda and interests. And that did not necessarily mean that whether poor people lost their jobs for minimum wages or got higher pay was their highest priority. I was now beginning to understand things I hadn't understood before. I mean, I was still a Marxist after taking Milton Friedman's course. But one summer in the government was enough to let me say, no, this government is really not the answer. I mean, that is...
Milton Friedman didn't cure you, but the federal government did.
The federal government did. So never say the federal government doesn't do anything.
In 1980, Thomas Sowell came here, the Hoover Institution at Stanford University.
When Hoover offered him the opportunity to basically pay him to be Tom Sowell, he took it. And he can write what he wants to write, when he wants to write, as much or as little, but he's always been very, very productive. And I think the independence and the freedom is what he liked.
In dozens of books, and numerous television appearances, and thousands of columns, Sowell has championed his philosophy of free markets and personal responsibility while weathering the storms of challenge and controversy. Sowell has spent his adult life proudly sharing his political and economic beliefs. For some, he's a clear thinker full of common sense. Others say he lacks empathy. What no one can doubt is the courage of this maverick intellectual.
If you could offer one sentence of counsel to some sophomore or junior who's watching this today.
It's not over till it's over, as Yogi Berra said. And I would say to this young person, if we, through some miracle, get through this, please take to heart the lesson of what happens when you vote on the basis of rhetoric and symbolism, and instead of using your mind. It doesn't matter how smart you are unless you stop and think.